Hello everyone, and welcome to this sixth edition of our Cybersecurity Showcase Week. We're excited to have you all back on this ISF Bright Talk channel. And this is, if this is your first time joining, it's great to have you with us. And our webinar for today, we're going to explore how organizations can use the ISF SOGP in its 2026 latest edition to turn the NIST Cybersecurity Framework from theory into practice. And for this, we will have one of our expert advisors, Alan Wilcox, who is with me and is going to introduce himself very shortly. For my part, I'm Benoit Hendricks, the lead author of the SOGP in its latest edition, 2026, and I'll be moderating this session and also sharing some of the latest updates and features of SOGP 2026. A few housekeeping notes. We'll be hosting the session for the next 45 minutes or so. Make sure you have some questions for us. You can put them in the chat, and we'll make sure we can answer in the last 10 minutes of this session. Please also note that the session is recorded, so if you want to watch it again, you can. And if you want some colleagues of yours to watch it and learn more from SOGP and NIST CSF, you will be able to share the link and make sure you share that with them. We're going to start the presentations. As I was saying, NIST CSF with SOGP 2026, from framework to practice, how to operationalize NIST CSF with the ISF SOGP 2026. And as I was saying, my name is Benoit Hendricks. I've been lead author of SOGP 2026 and 2024 version. And prior to that, at the ISF, I worked on various other security topics, such as supply security, quantitative information risk, which I'm always interested in as well. Going to ask our guest expert advisor speaker to introduce himself. Alan, welcome. Glad to have you with us today.
Good morning. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here. My name is Alan Wilcox. I'm based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is where I'm sitting right now in the USA. I recently retired from the Vanguard Group, a global mutual fund and investment management company. I've was there for 26 years, worked on global cybersecurity strategy, security assurance, over those decades, led countless projects from mobility to desktop DLP and so forth. Ended up in controls assurance, and the team I worked with was very involved with the standard good practice from the ISF and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. So we implemented a tool there and a comprehensive program for the CSF. That I'll talk a little bit about some of what I've learned in that capacity. Not what we did, but because that will stay there. But I'll talk a little bit about best practices that I've learned and some thoughts about implementing the cybersecurity framework. After I retired, I started working with the ISF as an expert advisor. I had been involved with the ISF since 2003, actually. I went back with a friend and counted our fingers, and it's actually 2003 that I started with the ISF, and I was on the council for a while. The ISF Council is the member group that governs the ISF's activities. The ISF is very unique, if you're not familiar with it, in that it is member governed and works only in the interests of its members. So that felt like very familiar territory coming from a mutual fund company. And now I'm working with the CSF and the ISF, so I only had to change one letter, I guess, to make that move.
Thanks, Alan. A very quick look at the plan for this session before we dive in. So a bit of NIST CSF background, and you're going to give us that, Alan. I will give you a little bit about SOGP 2026. As you will know, there's the latest update. And then we're going to dive in how to use the SOGP 2026 with the NIST CSF, how to operationalize CSF with SOGP. Wrap up Q&A. Make sure you have questions. We can also take questions as we go along during this session. And over to you, Alan.
Yeah, we really want this session to serve your needs and your interests. So just throw those questions out there and we'll try to get to them. So before I dive into the CSF, and I'll give a background to what the CSF is and as I see it. First, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is what is a control. We're going to talk about controls. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I started confusing myself because I'm like, well, that's a control. That's not a control. These people call this a control. Those people call that a control. And it became very confusing. Of course, in the theory, in the practice, and the way it's defined, a control is anything that reduces the likelihood of risk. So that's a good definition, but it's not very practical. And I want to really ground today's presentation in practice and dealing with the nitty-gritty of security and controls. So the only thing I can promise you, because I think the word is somewhat beyond redemption, I'm going to try to be consistent. So when I talk about a control, I'm talking about things like control procedures, the actual things that we do, the act of encrypting, the act of inspecting content. Those are controls. When I talk about the other things that are sometimes called controls, I'm going to call those outcomes or align them with the NIST subcategories. So I'm going to try to be consistent. If I slip, I apologize. It's slippery territory, but I'm going to try to be consistent with those terms. So if we look at the CSF, I'm going to talk a little bit about where it came from and how it's designed to work and what things I've observed and how it's matured over the years. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework is uniquely focused on what security actually does. So version 1 came out in 2014 as a result of a presidential order. There were a number of incidents that happened back then, and the government suddenly realized they couldn't solve all the problems, all cybersecurity incidents. There was critical infrastructure that the government needed to work and partner with private organizations with to better offset cybersecurity risks. So version 1 came out in 2014. 4 years later, version 1.1 came out with lots of enhancements in terms of risk assessment and supplier channel risks. The unique thing about the cybersecurity framework, people quickly realized, was that it expressed security in terms of business value, the outcomes, what security does for the business. It doesn't talk about how to do it, but it talks about what it produces. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of a side note here. From my experience, a lot of security people were already overwhelmed with mandates. So we've got to do all these things, and we have to show all these things. And there were overlapping meshes of control requirements. So there was, the NIST has its 853s, and ISO has its, and ISACA has its, and they all word things differently. And then you get a questionnaire, and it words things differently. So the immediate, I think, need across the security industry was like, oh no, another mandate. But I think what really happened is senior management started to realize that they could talk about security intelligently, and they could see the value of these outcomes. These are the things I should expect my security function to do without them having to worry about encryption algorithms or port scanning methods or getting into the real weeds of security. That really enabled a conversation that has been very valuable about what security does for the business and allowed management to manage that function much better. So version 2, 10 years later, version 2 comes out in 2024, and it's an absolute brilliant overhaul. It also positioned the CSF as very independent from U.S. national security, which is a good thing. Not that it doesn't serve that interest, but it became a rising tide that raises all boats, not just focused on one narrow instance of it. And one of the additions to this version 2. One, they added a whole new function, which is the highest level of governance. So they implemented this governance, and that removed a lot of redundancy also. And they provided clear implementation examples. With version 1 of the CSF, there was a lot of emphasis on, let's just go out and do this thing, even though that's not how you're supposed to approach it. Whereas version 2 said, no, here's some ways that you might do it. You don't just do the outcomes. You do some of these things that might produce the outcomes. So looking at the CSF core really is what people are talking about when we talk about the cybersecurity framework. It is the set of functions, these high levels, now 6, used to be 5 functions that organize these categories. Categories, in my mind, align a lot with departments or groups or organizational units where there are specific strategic components like platform security or identity and access or awareness. Those functions are things that we understand a little bit more clearly as almost traditional security functions. But underneath that is really the heart of the CSF core, 106 outcomes, 106 things that a security organization might do for the business. It's not everything a security function does. There's nothing in there about cryptographic key management or email even. It's rather what's the result of the things that security does. The example I'll be using throughout this presentation is PR, protect, DS, data security, number 2, which is that the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data in transit are protected. So we're going to kind of walk that through the process. And the outcomes now are interpreted through informative references, which are the links to the standards. Those are the links to ISO and other standards where these outcomes can be implemented. And they provide clear examples that are not definitive, they're just informative. So there's 2 areas of the CSF that are less well understood after you get through the core, which is profiles and tiers. Profiles is simply the subset of outcomes that you want to work with. Those are the things that are important for your particular instance. So it might be a profile applied to your organization. It might also be a profile that you set up for a particular activity. So it documents things like priority, status, who's responsible for what, and the mapped controls. There's community profiles that are out there for transit, manufacturing, semiconductors, cloud, finance. But there's also some that have been published for specific uses like ransomware response, securing AI, and protecting genomic data. Those are listed there, and you can look them up on the NIST website. My guess is there will be some more for AI and maybe post-quantum PQC in the years to come as we look at the complexity of how AI affects us. So those are profiles. A profile is a set of, I want you to think of profiles as just a set of those subcategories or the things that you want to focus on. Tiers, which are, you're going to hear me say tiers get no love. I've been told nobody does tiers. But when I went back and looked at tiers, I think there's a lot of value to them. People thought, oh, tiers are just a capability maturity model. So we've got that. We can brush it off. NIST doesn't talk about them that way. What they are is a tool for breaking down siloed security functions and getting your security organization to work together. They provide a rigor for governance, and they provide a way of talking about how well integrated your security functions are. So for example, if you have a firewall function and it doesn't talk to anybody, it's all siloed off, using tiers can be a way of gaining visibility, maybe breaking down that silo. So you can think of it structurally as a maturity model. It has familiar language like repeatable and enterprise and ad hoc, but it's really focused on security. Are you using risk? Are you doing an enterprise-wide approach? And are you updating and continuously improving in an adaptive security specific sort of way? So here's that example again. PRDSO2, the C, I, and A, the security of data in transit. I'll just say the data in transit is protected. Well, NIST doesn't answer some very important questions here. How do you do that? Is it just your own hunches? NIST is set up for you to look at an external standard to provide the meat for the bones that they are handing you. How do you know you did it right? Is it you're just having everything audited? Are you just giving your best guess? Do you have somebody else look at it? Are you meeting stakeholder expectations? You know, what are they, and do you even understand the stakeholder expectations? Or again, is there a communication channel there where things could get confused? Do you know you did it enough? And then how do you show others that you did it? In order to do that, you have to have a tool that provides an objective, evidence-based way of moving there. And I'll let Benoit talk a little bit about the standard of good practice. When he's done, I'm going to talk about the informative references that NIST provides just briefly and how the standard of good practice really fits into that context. Benoit?
Thank you, Alan. Yes, and I promise I won't speak too long about this, especially for those of you who are ISF members already. You will probably have seen a lot of announcements and webinars. And if you're not, well, you're about to find out a little bit more about SOGP before we join up the two together. So SOGP 2026, as it happens, has been updated only about a month and a half, at the end of March. And SOGP has a long history for those of you who are a little bit new to the ISF world. SOGP has been around since the late 90s, really. And we've been updating not me personally, I wasn't there at the ISF at the time, but the teams has been working on the SOGP updates, on regular updates every 2 years on average. Recently, since about 10 years ago, it's a strict, rigorous update cycle of every 2 years plus, and I explain that a little bit more from now on, a more continuous, more regular update cycle. So as of today, SOGP 2026 is 2 documents. We have on the left-hand side what we call the SOGP framework, the high-level summary that helps you answering the question where to start with SOGP. On the right-hand side, the SOGP implementation guidance. And we're going to give you a flavor of what's inside the implementation guidance. And you'll probably realize there's quite a comprehensive coverage in this manual. Interesting to know as well, if you register your interest, you will have a download link towards the end. You can have a copy at the moment of the exec summary, which is a 2-pager version. But in the coming months, we are going to start releasing the left-hand side document, SOGP framework, if you have registered your interest on our website. So SOGP framework will become a more public document. So for now, we have, especially for those of you who are ISF members, the SOGP framework, the SOGP implementation guidance, and what we have since 2026, especially for this update, the important message here is that we have additional content. And when we update the SOGP, we look at our extensive research program at the ISF, and that's what feeds into the update, as well as external development in the external standards. But primarily, especially for this update, we have looked at our ISF research or member feedback, and this is how we've updated the 2026 from the previous version of 2024. So we've added contents related to protecting mission critical information, protecting crown jewel types, more content on standard, more up-to-date content on system configurations, identity access management. These are quite traditional aspects of security, of course, and then some more advanced, latest recent ones like post-quantum cryptography. We mentioned that. AI, of course, we have coverage of AI security in the SOGP 2026, and the latest threat protection tooling mechanisms and practices you should look at deploying in your organizations. This is the very high-level, easy view of the SOGP. If you want to dive a little bit more into it, it is at the highest level. We have this categorization called the categories of information security in the SOGP, 25 categories of information security. So you'll see a very broad, full, extensive coverage of everything you can think of when you think about security. It goes from cryptography to security governance via threat protection, penetration testing, and the lower level details is in the right-hand side document that you can't possibly see on the screen. But this is the list of what we call the topics, the 164 topics, how to implement best practices. And it is really, it's a very useful tool to use as standalone, or equally, as we're about to see with Alan, in conjunction with the NIST CSF outcomes, for example. Don't know if you want to add something here, Alan, especially on this big list.
We'll get a little bit into it. It is a bit of an eye test there, so if anyone can actually read that, I'll buy you lunch. But it's the thing to take away here is that this is a comprehensive, mature standard that addresses things that you might not even be thinking about yet, like how to think about post-quantum cryptography, or if maybe you're starting a new job and have to deal with industrial control systems and don't know where to start. The standard of good practice is a huge head start on any of these topics. And the key thing also to think about with the standard of good practice is this represents decades of millions of dollars of research that the ISF has poured into these topics. So it's not just another academic saying, well, I think you should do this. It's actual practice over decades of what ISF member organizations are doing, what the best practices are. Those are all boiled down into this standard. So there is no other standard like that.
Thanks, Alan. I've got, I should say, an A3 version of this paper on my desk, as I usually have. The last important thing to note on the SOGP is that in this webinar, we'll talk exclusively about NIST CSF mapping, but we could talk equally about ISO mapping, CSA, cloud security, cloud control metrics mapping, and so on. So we have a strong position with these 6 or 7 international standards. Well, 6 on the slide, but there's actually a little bit more than that. But these are the 6 main ones. We map to these standards, and then vice versa, we take inputs from them. We have at the ISF a long-standing relation with these organizations, especially ISO, CSA, more recently developed, and then we started with NIST, our standing relation as well, which will be carrying on as we go along. So yeah, so when you join ISF, you have access to some of the mapping tables that we produce, and I guess this is one of the elements of this this exercise as well that Alan is going to go through, is use as a starting point some of the mapping that we provide, and then expanding it and making use of it to really leverage the use case of NIST CSF framework. I had one last slide, and then we'll go back to the NIST CSF. It's just to say that SOGP, when you're an ISF member, you have access to a whole ecosystem of tools and practices that are linked directly or indirectly to the SOGP. Very directly linked to the SOGP is our benchmark platform, benchmark tool, which is one of the tools that Alan, I know you've used actively, and this is the questionnaire version of SOGP in multiple questionnaires, and yeah, so it's a very, very powerful tool used by our membership.
So when we look at how these two tools integrate, the CSF focuses on the product. What does your security organization make? Whereas the standard of practice provides the how. What's the process to produce that outcome? On the CSF side, it would not be unreasonable to expect many organizations to produce every single one of the outcomes that is in the cybersecurity framework. It would be very unlikely for any organization to produce to use every control that's in the standard of good practice. It is the place you go to get your controls. It does not prescribe for you what all your controls should be. That's your cybersecurity strategy. So looking a little closer, another way to think about this, I think in analogies, so bear with me here, that the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is like a menu. It says, okay, here are the things our kitchen, our security program produces. It boils things down into, okay, I understand I want this dish, I want that dish. I don't need to know how it's made. So that gives management a real opportunity. You can think of the standard of good practice as a recipe box, or really an encyclopedia, because it basically has the components, has the ways that you make all those things that are on your menu. So one is what you produce, and the other is the how. And I can also say here that if you don't want to use the standard of good practice, you can look at other standards. But from my experience, and I can actually walk through this, I went to the NIST database of informative references. There are only 4 sources of comprehensive, self-reported, comprehensive, and published final informative references. They are the Security Controls Framework, the UK Cyber Governance Code of Practice, PCI DSS, and CIS Controls. That's it. ISO is actually not listed there, but even if we include ISO, it's ISO 27001, which is very high level, not the details of how to do it. And the other thing is, if you look at all those controls specifically for the outcome I'm going to be talking about, protecting data in transit, the only thing they offer is encryption. That's it. Now, I sure hope your organization is doing more than just encryption to secure data in transit. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but in my experience, yeah, you can use whatever control standard you want, but is your control standard comprehensive? Is it up to date? Does it, I know, for example, 27002, I think has only been updated twice in the past decade. Similarly with 853, those are good standards that everybody should be aware of. But if you want a single place to go that is time tested and comprehensive, you can go to the standard of good practice. So let's get into the actual core of why we're here today. This is a very simple process that you could probably put together yourself, but I want to walk through the mechanics of it so that you can see how we add value and how you can really get the most out of the cybersecurity framework. We're going to talk about profiles, controls, tests, the reviews, and then how you put that together into a plan. So I mentioned profiles before. Those are the set of outcomes that you're choosing to focus on, whether it's for your organization or some kind of strategic initiative. So you start with that. There are 106 of them. What's the most critical thing? What issues are your stakeholders more concerned about? What are your regulatory concerns? And is there a community profile? And I want to add that you need to take community profiles with a grain of salt. If you look at the Cyber Risk Institute, they produced a financial services community profile. If you look at the membership of that CRI organization, it's all the big banks. I worked for an organization that wasn't a bank, but we were still in financial services. So you do have to take the community profiles with a grain of salt. It was very valuable. It helps you, it really tailors the language to a particular use case, but do be aware of where it's coming from and where it might not include everything that you need to include in your profile. Moving on, then we look at controls. The ISF publishes a web app. You can get the standard good practice in Excel. You can get it in machine readable formats. You can get it as a PDF. And once you're a member, you can just give that to every single person in your organization. Or you can, if you're in the US and you're kind of not sure about some of the funny spellings of those words, you can go through and just change them all and publish your own manifestation, if you will, of the standard of good practice with your own corporate style guide implemented with your own language changes. That's perfectly all right. You can go to the ISF SOGP web app, which you log into, and you can then look up the standard. You can make comments on it. You can share comments on it, and you can get just a load of cross-references to other tools and other ways to dive deep into a particular topic. As an example, PRDSO2, that's the one about securing information in transit from the CSF. If you go into the SOGP web app, it gives you 4 topics where you can dig deeper, and that's just at the topic level. So those are the main concentrations of controls for that outcome. Information lifecycle. Data leak prevention. That's a pretty important data in transit control that none of those other standards mention. And then you get the cryptographic solutions, including key management there, that can help you protect information in transit. In addition to those 4, you can also search for specific controls in specific niche areas, such as cloud computing. There are some controls in the cloud computing topics that talk about, like, when you upload data to the cloud, make sure that that's a secure channel. There are scattered controls in other topics as well. And I want to remind people to throw comments or questions, stones, bribes, you can, whatever you want. You can throw it in the question section and we'll get to that. So then we get to tests. Well, testing varies quite a bit among member organizations, and even within an individual organization, you might need to do full control assurance testing, where you're doing design and effectiveness tests, where you've got test plans and you have a schedule that you repeat tests on. That's great. I'm guessing that even the most rigorous organizations don't apply that rigor to every control, but they apply it to the most critical controls. Even whether you do or whether you don't, all organizations can benefit from self-assessment. Benoit mentioned the security benchmark, which is out there that the ISF has. That's one of the reasons many members join the ISF. There's also a lighter weight tool called the Security Health Check, which has fewer questions and is a little more concentrated. Both of those give you not only your results, but they give you an insight to how everyone else responded. So you get kind of these side view mirrors that help you see how security is being practiced at other organizations. I would advocate a hybrid approach that, depending on the strategic value of a particular control or topic, you're going to require more depth of testing. The results of the testing, however you assess it, are going to give you an idea of whether it's working. And that's what we'll take a look at in a minute. The ISF has a topic in the standard good practice that talks about security assurance, and that's AS 1.1.